This video covers Act 2 of Blood Brothers, the beginning of Act 2, from page 59 onwards. So we saw at the end of the previous act how it ended on this real note of optimism, but we said that that optimism was fundamentally false. We talked about how, because this play has elements of tragedy, we know that however good things might seem for a time, they are fundamentally doomed. We're going to see that note of optimism continue now, but we'll also see some notes creeping in that remind us about what the future will hold. So the act begins. Mrs. Johnston moves forward to sing. Once again, of course, the singing, the Brechtian element, emphasizes the theatricality, reminds us that this is not reality that we're looking at. And of course, the use of rhyme as well further emphasizes that, further distances us from real life. So she sings, "The house we got was lovely, the neighbours are a treat, they sometimes fight on Saturday night, but never in the week." Now, here we have the use of sparse. It's a serious topic that's being dealt with here, domestic violence, domestic abuse, etc. But it's dealt with in the manner of a joke almost. It's trivialized. It also tells us perhaps how bad life in Liverpool was, the idea that violence all week long was the norm, but it's a reminder that even now, characters who thought that a change of location would somehow allow them to escape the consequences of the past, it's a reminder that you cannot escape those consequences. Violence follows them. It continues on then, and says, Mrs. Johnston turns and looks next door. Raised voices and a dog barking are heard off. And the neighbours often say, "What time do you call this then? Time I got shot of you, rat bag." Which just links to the earlier point, and the dog barks further. Carries on then. "Since I pay my bills on time, the milkman insists I call him Joe. He brings me bread and eggs." And Joe the milkman enters, says, "I've got legs like Marilyn Monroe," and Mrs. Johnston and Joe dance. Now, on the one hand, then, this is almost cyclical, because the milkman is a character who is introduced very early in Act 1 as a facilitating character to show us about Mrs. Johnston's poverty. He's now reintroduced, as we say, in a cyclical sort of a way, or perhaps a parallel way would be a better way of describing it, to show that overall her life conditions have improved. The fact that she can actually pay her bills, for example. And the fact that, once again, we're back to using the Marilyn Monroe motif in a kind of positive way. We see the sense of dancing, and here, yeah, I suppose it's still escapist, but dancing is also used as a kind of celebratory sort of idea. And it says, "Sometimes he takes me dancing, he even takes me dancing." There's an idea that she is actually returning to a little bit of the freedom and happiness of her youth. And Joe exits, dancing. She goes on then, and here now 2 quotations about the character of Sammy, having talked about her. "I know our Sammy burnt the school down, but it's very easily done. The teacher lets the silly gets play with magnesium." Now, again, we're talking about very serious antisocial behaviour. We're talking about actual criminal damage here, arson, and yet again, it's dealt with through the means of the sparse. In terms of the character of Sammy, structurally, it leads into our idea about the kind of increasing levels of the violence that he has been engaged with, and so it compares something that started with weeing through people's letterboxes. We now see what he's reached, and I think, in terms of Mrs. Johnston, the fact that she seems so tolerant about it and rather blames the teacher, I suppose in a sense it reflects further on the fact that she's not a very effective parent. Although, as we've also said before, I do think that Willie Russell wouldn't blame her for that personally. He thinks that it's part of the wider failings of society. Now, I think later on we will come to talk about Willie Russell's purpose for this play, and we'll talk about whether in fact, he himself is giving out a rather flawed message, because I don't think anybody could argue that you can blame society for your son being an arsonist. But that's what Russell seems to be suggesting here. Anyhow, it continues. Thank God he only got probation. Probation, of course, meaning a sort of a final warning, but not jail time. And we see a judge ticking Sammy off, i.e., giving him a sort of a warning. Mrs. Johnson says the judge was old and slow, and she sings to the judge, laying on a smile for him. But it was kind of him, said I reminded him of Marilyn Monroe. The judge, slightly scandalized, says, could I take you dancing? Take you dancing. The mood here, then, overall, in spite of these warnings, these structural foreshadowing warnings that we're having about the fact that violence still lurks under this sparse surface, overall the tone then now is still very jolly. And so it says Mrs. Johnson takes the judge's gavel and bangs him on the head, gavel being the judge that he used to call order, and the judge exits stunned. A little sort of comic scene there. It continues on then, and we now have some further information. Once again, we see Mrs. Johnson being used, as with at the start of Act 1, we see her being used for exposition for this plot information. And so she says, Mickey's just turned 14, you know he's at that age. Presumably we're talking puberty, I wouldn't like to specify what that actually means. We see Mickey in his room, and it says, when you mention girls or courting, he flies into a rage. And he says, shut up talking about me, mother. He's got a thing for taking blackheads out, and he thinks that I don't know that he dreams all night of girls who look like Marilyn Monroe. He's even started dancing, secret dancing, presumably practicing his moves. And then it goes slower, and the sort of tone of the music becomes a little bit sadder and more wistful. And it says, and as for the rest, they've flown the nest, got married or moved away. Donna Marie's already got 3. She's a bit like me that way. Key quotation there, obviously in terms of the minor character of Donna Marie. It's important to note the parallel there with Mrs. Johnston in terms of being prematurely aged, and it's emphasised there by the remark that goes with that, she's a bit like me that way. The sense then that working class women are trapped in this sort of cycle of poverty and lack of aspiration, where early pregnancy and marriage seems to be almost the only thing that's open to them. She continues on then, and that other child of mine, Eddie, I haven't seen for years, although each day I pray he'll be okay, not like Marilyn Monroe. Now, this is significant because we said right at the beginning of this play that the Marilyn Monroe motif, the way that it's used, develops. And here, if you like, the chronology of the play has now moved past the point where Marilyn Monroe is dead. And so we now see that dramatic irony that we knew from the start, knowing that Marilyn Monroe was already dead and did have that tragic life. We now see that Mrs. Johnston is starting to be aware of that too. And it's a reminder that the working class dream, the working class aspiration that Marilyn Monroe symbolized, it's a reminder that that too is a flawed and difficult path. We continue then. And I think this section, the previous section we've just seen with Mrs. Johnston, and now this following section with Mrs. Lyons, these two scenes operate almost in parallel. Having seen some exposition for how one character is doing, we now see how the other is doing. And in terms of the kind of lack of realism, the way in which William Russell subverts the unity of place, that Aristotle classical idea that the stage should only represent one place, at that word from Mrs. Johnston, the space is used fluidly, and the stage transforms from one location, Mrs. Johnston's house, to Mrs. Lyons' house, and now we see what they're doing. And we see that she's teaching him to dance. So on the other side of the stage, Mrs. Lyons enters waltzing with a very awkward 14-year-old Edwards, and she's speaking 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then sings, yes, that's right, you're dancing, that's right, you're dancing, and says, you see, Edward, it is easy. He replies, it is if you have someone to practice with, girls, but in term time we hardly ever see a girl, let alone dance with one. She replies, I'll give you some more lessons when you're home for half term. Now, come on, you're going to be late. Daddy's at the door with the car. Now, are you sure you've got all your bags? Um, Now, the implication then, when you're home for half term, clearly we find out that he is at a boarding school. He is at a private school. Um, and so we see straight away then, and we'll see further in the next few scenes, about the educational divide, which is just one more symbol for the wider class divide between the two boys. And of course, it links back to, if you think right back to the first time the two boys meet in Act 1, the debate over what's a dictionary and all that sort of thing. The educational divide continues to be shown, and will be shown further on as well. What else? The fact that she still refers to his father as Daddy is a reminder that if Mickey is prematurely aged, then in a sense Edward leads a very sheltered life. He is not compelled to grow up in quite the same way, and not compelled to face the harsh realities of life. So we continue on then, and he says, yes, they're in the boot. Mrs. Lyons looks at him and says, I'll see you at half term then, darling. She kisses him, a light kiss, but holds on to him. Look after yourself, my love. Now, that quotation there, but hold on to him, I think if we want to talk about Mrs. Lyons' insecurity, then I think that's another good quotation that we can put with that, because it just shows the fact that she's never comfortable with Edward. She's always possessed of the knowledge that he's not truly her own child. And Edward, in a sense, like we said before, the fact that Edward seems to sort of sense some of this, and seems to feel some discomfort. And I think we see that again here, because he'll say, "Oh, Mummy, stop fussing. I'm going to be late." She says, "We have had a very good time this holiday, though, haven't we?" And again, if we talk about the discomfort between them, look at that there. We have had that modal there. Have shows the doubt she's asking him to reassure her, and the fact that she then repeats that same modal, haven't we, in the tag question at the end, we have had a very good time, haven't we, just emphasizes this doubt that she has. Even though she's doing everything she can to treat him like her son, on some level she still feels like it's never quite the same. Guilt, as we've seen, and consequences of actions follow you throughout. It continues on then. We have, where are we? We always do. And she says, yes, we're safe here, aren't we? And again, another tag question. Mummy, what are you on about? Sometimes the car horn is heard. The fact that Edward says we always do, again, just emphasizes Mrs. Lyons' insecurity, because on that basis, it seems like there's no reason for her, no rational reason to doubt. Of course, we all know, dramatic irony, we all know there is a good reason. So, Mrs. Lyons hustles him out good-naturedly and says, go on, there's Daddy getting impatient. Bye-bye, Edward. Bye, Ma, and he exits.